This is the Acer Nitro 5. It's Acer's entry-level 15-inch gaming laptop, and it's targeted towards gamers who are looking for the best specs without breaking the bank. In fact, it's cheaper than the famous Helios 300 lineup, and it competes directly with MSI's Bravo 15 and the Dell G5 15 SE. Now, I'm typically not really excited about budget gaming notebooks, or haven't been excited lately, because I took a look at the MSI Bravo 15 and the Dell G5 15 SE. Those laptops had some serious issues, and I just couldn't recommend them entirely. But there are a lot of great things to like about this laptop. And that's because it's got an RTX 2060 and it only costs about $1,000, which is actually a really good deal in my opinion. The build quality is also really good for the price. I was surprised by a lot of factors. But given that it still has a lot of great specs, there are certain things that you need to know about before pulling the trigger on the Nitro 5. As always, I'll make sure to leave timestamps in the description down below so that you can get to a particular segment. So without any further ado, let's dive in right after this.
The Razer Viper Ultimate, the lightest and fastest wireless mouse designed for esports with an accurate Focus Plus 20K DPI optical sensor, Razer Hyperspeed wireless technology that is 25% faster than the competition, all packed into a lightweight body with optical mouse switches. Check it out below.
Alright, so Acer is offering both Intel and AMD options with the Nitro 5. The AMD model starts at $600, and for that, you get a Ryzen 5 CPU and a GTX 1650. There's also a 1650 Ti model, but that goes for about $1,000, and honestly, that's a poor value for gamers, in my opinion, considering what else is out there. The Intel flavor starts at $650, and for that, you get a quad-core 10th-gen Core i5 processor, 8 gigs of RAM, a 256 gig NVMe drive, and a GTX 1650. The sample that we have in hand comes with a 9th gen 6-core 12-thread Core i7 9750H processor, twice the memory, the same amount of storage, which really isn't that much at a time when games are starting to eat up at least 150 gigabytes or more, a 1080p 144Hz display that's IPS according to Acer, more on that later, and an RTX 2060 for about $1,050 US. Though depending on when you see this and where you shop, that price might be either higher or lower. For those of you who caught the CPU, your eyes aren't deceiving you. This laptop indeed uses an older 9th generation CPU, and while that might seem odd, Acer actually has a pretty good reason for this. You see, as I mentioned earlier, this is purely focused towards gamers, so they still decided to offer a 12-thread processor instead of going with one of the most expensive 10th-gen CPUs, because Intel tax is ridiculous. So they decided to save a little bit of money on that forefront and then maximize the budget towards a faster graphics card, which in this case is an RTX 2060. This is actually something that we're pushing towards more desktops and notebooks because, you know, games these days are in one way, shape, or form limited by the GPUs. So getting something that's faster is a win-win. So the Nitro 5 isn't designed to be a superstar in multi-threaded productivity applications. I would sort of call this the exact opposite of the MSI Bravo 15, even though MSI called that failure a gaming notebook. Its CPU performance was a priority, whereas Acer's target here is strictly gaming. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, the Helios lineup lies just above this model, and that could cause some overlap since there's a Helios 300 that's about $150 more, but it comes with a 512 gig SSD and a 10th gen Core i7 CPU. If that ever goes on sale, it could cause some serious issues for the Nitro 5. From a physical standpoint, there's nothing really special about this laptop. You can clearly tell that this is indeed a gaming notebook by the looks. Acer has added a touch of red and black accents here and there, but it isn't overly done in my opinion. I really like the blacked out logo at the front. It reminded me of doing a Chrome delete on my car. The edges have a slightly different texture compared to the center area, but given that this is an all plastic body, it easily catches finger oils, so keep that in mind. It's very difficult to keep clean for the most part. There's also another thing that I want to bring up. You see this rear ventilation grill right over here? This thing is actually really sharp. I mean, it won't really cut you, but I'm just gonna like glide my hand and you can sort of tell that it's not that pleasing. It's very edgy, so it's really not that comfortable when you're holding it like that and just transporting it, you know, especially if you're taking this thing to school or anywhere else. I think Acer could have done something better by implementing something a little bit low profile, because this is, like I said, it's too edgy. The hinge is okay. There is a little bit of wobble, but nothing to be worried about. There's also very less keyboard flex. Overall, I gotta say, this laptop, it really surprised me in the build quality area, because when you compare this to say something like the Bravo 15 or even the Dell G5 15 SE, Acer just knocked it out of the park. It's really good, and this is exactly what a budget laptop should feel like in the first place. I should also mention that this thing is pretty thin compared to the G5 15 SE, so it's less than 5 pounds, 4.85 to be exact, and it's only about an inch thick. So when it comes to portability, you shouldn't have an issue lugging this thing around. The interior space is pretty clean for the most part. Aside from the red accented keys, you're getting a full-size layout, and I love how big the arrow keys are. The red accents tend to remove the stealth feeling and stands out a bit more. It is LED backlit in red. However, there are some models offering 4-zone RGB lighting. It doesn't get that bright, and unfortunately, it doesn't light up consistently as well across all keys, so keep that in mind. The WASD and arrow keys are outlined, but it's pretty subtle to differentiate it with the rest of the keys. The keys themselves are really good. They are a bit on the mushier side without a distinctive activation point, but there is plenty of travel distance, and there's no key wobble. That's something that I did not expect from a notebook carrying such a price tag. The trackpad is satisfactory. It is a plastic surface with support for precision drivers. The only issue that I have is that it's positioned way too far towards the left-hand side of the notebook, so there's not a lot of room to place your palms, your left palms comfortably. You can easily just, skip. I had the same issue with the G5 15 SE. I just wished if Dell sort of off-centered it a little bit so that, you have more room to comfortably place your wrists. But yeah, other than that, it's decent. I wouldn't say it's great. You're much better off using an external mouse. I do want to mention the bloatware that Acer did pre-install with the Nitro 5. There's a lot of Acer management utilities and other pop-up windows that just show up, especially with the antivirus program that's preloaded. It gets annoying, so you'll definitely have to spend a little bit more time cleaning those up. This is what the webcam looks like, and honestly, it's pretty good. In fact, it's better than the XPS 15 that I checked out recently. The microphone quality is also really good. There's no crackling or pop happening, which is awesome. Honestly, I think for a $1,000 notebook, it's pretty amazing. The speakers are bottom facing, and they're bad, like really bad. In fact, Acer did build in some audio profiles within the NitroSense app, and after playing around with them, the only thing I noticed is that it sort of increased the treble and sort of distorted it at certain levels. Honestly, just get yourself a pair of headphones for a decent multimedia experience, because it's a $1,000 laptop. Taking a look at the I/O, on the left-hand side, you get a Kensington lock, LAN port, HDMI 2.0, USB 3.1 Gen 1 Type-C, 2 USB 3.1 Type-A's. Just keep in mind that all these ports are Gen 1 5 gigabits per second, even the Type-C. Switching over to the right, there is power in, a USB 2.0 port, and an audio jack. I'm not a fan of the power connector on the right side, but Acer's power input is a right angle connector, so it does make it less intrusive. Moving on to the display, and this is where things get really interesting. So here's the deal. You're getting a 15.6-inch 1080p screen with a refresh rate of 144 Hz. Great, right? And Acer claims that it is an IPS panel that can get as bright as 300 nits. My first impressions were pretty poor. I mean, I was noticing washed out colors, not the greatest view angles. Thing is, when I ran my display analysis test, that basically confirmed with those impressions. As you can see, it only covers 66% sRGB, 49% Adobe RGB, and 49% DCI-P3. So don't fool yourselves thinking that it's got an IPS display so I can use it for photo editing or video editing. No, don't do it. It's pretty bad. Also, the display only got as far as 280 nits, so I never got as far as 300 nits, according to what Acer claims. And finally, I did experience some backlit bleed on the top portion of the display. It was a bit concerning, especially when watching movies and things like that, but when you're gaming, you shouldn't be worried about that. Speaking of gaming, 144 Hz, it's welcoming. I love the fact that you're at least getting a high refresh rate screen. Acer claims a 3 millisecond response time, but overall, it really didn't stand out as anything special. When you get under the hood, this notebook reveals a pretty unique looking cooling assembly with 2 fans placed right next to each other. Even though the CPU and GPU are supposed to have their own fans according to Acer's NitroSense utility, the 2 largest heat pipes are shared. I mean, sure, there's a smaller one that runs from the GPU to a secondary heatsink on the notebook's right-hand side, but it'll be interesting to see if the setup causes any temperature issues. Upgrading the Nitro 5 is pretty straightforward. Once you get inside, you have instant access to the 2 RAM slots, Maximum supported memory is 32 gigabytes. There are two M.2 slots that are covered with heatsinks, one of which is preoccupied by that 256 gig NVMe drive, and it's unfortunately slow, compared to the competition at least. For those of you wondering, Acer is using the Hynix BC501 Gen 3 SSD, and it doesn't have the greatest specs. You can also find a 2.5-inch hard drive bay right beneath the M.2 slot. Acer does include the necessary cables in the box, so make sure you find that before tossing out the box. Honestly, I'd rather get a bigger battery instead of a 2.5-inch drive bay, but that's just me. Speaking of battery, this thing comes with a 55 watt-hour cell, and with light load use, expect 7.5 hours, which is quite respectable. And if you watch your consumption, it should get you through a day of note-taking or light web browsing. Heavy load is one of the longer runtimes I've seen, which is probably because of the less power-hungry 9th Gen chip. Remember, those CPUs tend to be capped at much lower power than current 10th Gen Comet Lake processors. So we've already seen what the cooling system is like on the Nitro 5. It's pretty unique, and you can control the fans or the cooling system through Acer's NitroSense app. It's pretty straightforward, where you can set the fan speeds, enable Cool Boost, control the power plants, view temperatures, and also set audio options, as I mentioned earlier, through Acer's True Harmony, which is useless in my opinion. Remember, the Nitro 5 has two fans, one for the GPU and one for the CPU. Through NitroSense, they can be controlled individually through manual inputs or simply left on auto mode. On top of that, there's a Cool Boost setting that increases the maximum RPMs in situations where the fans are forced to run at 100%. Personally, I didn't find Cool Boost doing anything since the fans never really hit their highest RPM levels in normal testing. Speaking of cool, the surface temperatures are right in line with some of the cooler running notebooks we've come across. In general, the palm rest area, the keyboard, and most of the bottom don't get overly warm, though there is a hot spot right in the middle. That's pretty much expected since this is where there's that open ventilation. It's also great to see most of the heat is directed out the back instead of blasting your mouse hand with hot air. What's incredible is that Acer isn't sacrificing on noise to get those super cool exterior temperatures either. Even in high performance mode with Cool Boost enabled, this laptop stayed pretty much quiet when compared to many of the other gaming notebooks that we've tested. When loading the system up with an all-core render, the temperatures stay super low, but check out the clock speed. It plunges down to Intel's base clock of 2.6 GHz and just sits there regardless of how cool the CPU was running. I even tried the exact same test with the fans running at 100%, and the frequency didn't change one bit. There are a couple reasons for this sort of behavior. First of all, Acer is religiously sticking to the 45 watt TDP spec for the 9750H, so the package power tends to bottleneck clock speeds regardless of how cool the CPU gets. Many of the notebooks from previous generation tend to run their 9750Hs at 50 to 60 watts, which then resulted in higher frequencies than what we saw here. The current generation of notebooks featuring the 10th Gen Core i7 10750Hs are pretty much similar, but I have to wonder why Acer is actually doing something like this, given that the cooling system is more than capable enough to cool a pretty higher TDP spec CPU. But I think I have a theory. Maybe Acer's trying to sort of separate the performance levels between the Nitro series and the Helios lineup, which is the step up above this laptop. And as we move on to benchmark results, sticking to the minimum Intel spec hurts Cinebench multi-core results, especially against the MSI GS66, which has the 10750H running at a pretty constant 56 watts. But check out the single core run in Cinebench. It's pretty obvious. Acer's targeting one key area, and that's why fan speeds increase more in lightly threaded situations. As far as other results, they're pretty much the same as Cinebench, where the CPU is fully loaded, so the Nitro 5 ends up trailing pretty much everything. But then the RTX 2060 and the integrated graphics can flex its muscles in applications like Premiere to beat over the TUF A15 and almost match the A15 in resolve. Then WinRAR shows that the Nitro's great lightly threaded performance can almost hide how slow its SSD is. And I guess on that note, it's time to switch gears to gaming. And with the usual temperatures and clock speeds over time graph, you can see that the 9750H turn around in a big way. The Nitro 5 is laser targeted at providing higher clocks in gaming. It's still running well under 90 degrees, but now the frequency averages out between, 3.25 GHz and 3.4 GHz. Moving on to GPU, and it maintains clock speeds that are above NVIDIA's spec sheet while the core stays under 80 degrees. But how does this compare to other notebooks? Well, The TUF A15 also has an RTX 2060, and the Nitro 5 kept to about the same average 1550 MHz clock speed, but it also stayed a good 7 degrees cooler. But moving on to actual gaming results, and it's so obvious that this laptop is punching above its price here. In most cases, it either passes or matches the more expensive TUF A15 from Asus, and that's a really good result for a notebook that costs about $1,000. I have to say, when it comes to 1080p gaming, the RTX 2060 and the i7-9750H are a really good combination for the price. Honestly, if the prices were the same, I'd pick the RTX 2060 with a 9th-gen CPU over a 10th gen and a GTX 1660 Ti any day. Alright, so I think it's time to wrap up this review. The Acer Nitro 5 has surprised me in a lot of ways. The first thing is, of course, the price point. $1,000. I think you're getting a lot for that money. The first thing being that gaming performance. The RTX 2060 can actually push really good frame rates at 1080p. You're also getting a really good build quality with a fantastic keyboard for gaming as well as typing or making notes as well. And the battery life is pretty respectable, and you get a lot of upgrade options as well if you want to populate another M.2 drive or that second 2.5-inch hard drive bay. With that being said, there are some sacrifices that you're taking. The first thing is, of course, the display. While Acer says that it's IPS, it's not color accurate. So if you're planning on, doing photo work, or if you're planning on video editing, probably connect an external monitor. Don't rely on it. It's not that color accurate. And I have to admit that the SSD is slow. It's really slow. Finally, there's bloatwares. There's a lot of bloatware applications pre-installed, which you might have to just spend some time cleaning that up. Now, if you need more CPU performance rather than raw gaming horsepower, and of course, if you need a lot more storage, there are a lot of great AMD-based alternatives as well. So on that note, thank you so much for watching. I'm actually curious to see how low the price gets, especially for special sales event like Black Friday, Boxing Day, and things like that. So keep an eye out for this. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. By the way, say hello to Hero. It's my new plant in the office. He's gonna make some appearances here and there. Yep.